How's it going, y'all? My name is Nick. This is the Inverted.Visions YouTube channel, and welcome to an episode of Game Talk, show where I pick a game-related topic and I talk about it. My most recent video, which is the Chili music video, which you should watch it if you haven't seen it. I'll put a little link up there at the top of the video. In that video, one of the games featured was Mario Kart 64 for the Nintendo 64, and it got me thinking about all the racing games that are on the N64, and so I played a bunch of them, and I felt like talking about it, so I'm going to talk about them. So this should be a fun video. At the end of it, I'm going to do a little mini Game Trax episode and feature some cool music from these games. So without further ado, let's just get into it. This is Nintendo 64 Racing Games. All right, so let's just get started with the game that kind of that inspired me to make this video, which is actually not Mario Kart 64. It was Ridge Racer 64. I actually recently picked this game up from a local game store near me, and it was like 10 bucks, and I was like, I like Ridge Racer on the PS1, so I'm sure the N64 version is at least interesting. But I wasn't sure what to expect really. But this is a really fun game. Ridge Racer 64 has like the gameplay and the tracks of Ridge Racer 1 and Ridge Racer 2, which is Ridge Racer Revolution, actually on the PS1. Ridge Racer 64 is super fun. It's got elements of the previous two games plus its own kind of gameplay style. It also has its own tracks, which are pretty interesting. The graphics in this game are really good as far as N64 graphics go. They're really nice. It kind of goes for the more realistic style that Rage Racer and Ridge Racer Type 4 went for. It's not as colorful and bold as the first two games on PS1, but the gameplay is solid and the music is pretty good, and the track design is great. And it's just like it's just fun. Like I wasn't expecting to enjoy it as much as the PS1 game, especially the original, because I love the original Ridge Racer. But this game was really fun, and it kind of inspired me to make a whole video about racing games on the N64. The only knock against this game for me personally is I think the soundtrack to the first Ridge Racer on PS1 is amazing, and unfortunately these songs on Ridge Racer 64 don't hold a candle to the original Ridge Racer soundtrack. Let's see. Let's go to the next game here. I'll just go for the classic. Hey, Cooper. I'm not sure if you can see, but there's a cat right here, and he's talking to me. It's good to see him, though. Yeah, it's good to see you. Yeah. So the next game I'm talking about is Mario Kart 64. I don't have to say too much about this game because everyone knows Mario Kart 64. Everyone loves this game. It's a true classic. Yes, I know you agree with me. It's a classic. It still holds up to this day. I went through kind of a period where I was like, oh man, Mario Kart 64 is, it's not as good as the new ones, and it just kind of gets stiff controls. But going back to 64 is really fun. The music's really nice. The graphics are really nice. It's kind of interesting how most of the game, the tracks are 3D, but the characters are all 2D sprites that are just drawn that look like they have depth, which is a nice trick to probably get the game running better. And the controls are obviously not what you expect out of a modern Mario Kart game, but there's kind of like there's an element of fun with how stiff and kind of unruly the game can kind of feel, which kind of lends itself more to like crazy 4-player races. So yeah, Mario Kart 64 is a classic, everyone knows that, but it still holds up and it's worth playing today. Let's see, next up I'm going to talk about something a little unorthodox. So Micro Machines 64 Turbo. This is a pretty fun game, actually. I had never really played much of the Micro Machines games. I know there's one on the NES and Super Nintendo. I think they're also on Genesis and Game Boy. They're everywhere. Yes, I know you know they're on the Game Boy too. But they're everywhere. This is the third game. On the PS1, it was the third game, the 64 version. They just called Micro Machines 64 Turbo. This game is really fun. Micro Machines is an isometric, it's like top-down racing game. It's really simplistic, and the whole idea is that you play as these small little Micro Machine cars in like real world environments. So like, you know, like you play on like a kitchen table and a pool table and stuff like that. But it's really fun. It's quick and fast-paced. One thing I want to mention is there's a fun game mode in this that I think is only 2-player, but it might be more than that. Hi, it's good to see you. But there's a fun 2-player mode where you and your opponent are racing, less for like first place, but more for like screen real estate. So if you fall too far behind, then if the screen catches up to you, then you lose. Yes, it's good to see him. My cat is talking to me. He loves Micro Machines. So yeah, it's a fun game, and it's worth a shot on the Nintendo 64. Let's see, so I'll talk about the Cruisin' series now. So Cruisin' there's 3 games on the N64, all of which were in the arcade as well. There's Cruisin' USA, which is the first one. This came out pretty early on in the N64's lifespan. There's an arcade version that that Midway really pushed before the N64 came out as being like, this game is coming to the N64. I think at the time it was called the Ultra 64, but they're really pushing that like this game will be on the next Nintendo console in all of its glory.
Coming to your home in 1995, only on Nintendo Ultra 64.
The N64 version isn't as good as the arcade version, obviously, but it's still a fun game. I know people like to say now that this game is bad. Cruisin' USA is definitely fun. It's really twitchy. It's kind of unruly, but it's a fun game. It doesn't take itself too seriously, and it's got some cool environments. It's worth a shot. It's definitely a fun little game. Cruisin' World, the sequel, is more or less the same thing. It's slightly more grounded in reality, if that makes any sense. Like, it doesn't feel as twitchy as the first game does. It's not as sensitive in the control department. It's still a fun game, and the locales are a little more, I don't want to say exotic because that's the third game, but the locales are a little more eccentric than just the USA. And finally, we have Cruisin' Exotica, which was the third and final game released in the Cruisin' series. Or maybe there's more. I think there's actually a new one that I saw in an arcade kind of recently. But on the N64, there's these 3 when it finishes off with Exotica. Exotica is my favorite. It's got the best feeling controls. There's all kind of weird thing where if you play in first person mode, it kind of feels like there's not a lot of weight to your car. But none of these games went for realism. It's more just crazy fun. The third one has, you can go to Atlantis and stuff like that. So it definitely does not take itself seriously at all. There's a whole crazy trick system and stuff like that too, and crazy jumps. So if you want to have turn your brain off and have some fun, the Cruisin' series is great. Especially Exotica is my favorite one. I'll talk about Lego Racers on the Nintendo 64. So Lego Racers is actually a game from my childhood. I really liked this game on the PC. I played it when I was a kid. When I was really young, I played this game on the PC. Playing it now, it's still kind of fun. It's not the best kart racer in the world, but it's also not the worst. The locales are interesting because they all pull from like the Lego sets of the 90s. So there's some pretty cool locations that kind of like meld like fantasy world with like Lego blocks, which is kind of cool. One thing I will mention, the N64 version of the game, personally, I feel that the controls are a lot less responsive. It almost feels like there's a little bit of lag when you're turning that I never felt on the PC game. And I remember getting the PC game a couple years ago and playing it again, and it felt responsive. So the N64 version of Lego Racers has a little bit of weird laggy controls, which is unfortunate. The game itself is fun though, and there's some cool music in it, and I feel like this game could actually have its own Game Trax episode with some of the cool songs that are in there. I'll probably include that at the end of this episode, or at least one of those songs. Moving on, I will talk about Wave Race. So this is Wave Race 64. This is another early N64 game made by Nintendo. Super fun game, really really great graphics and really great water physics. I think that was a huge reason for this game to even be made in the first place, was Nintendo basically showing off how good the N64 can do water physics. And it's great. I mean, like I feel like I haven't played a game recently or in a long time, a modern game that has water physics as good as Wave Race 64. I don't even know if the GameCube game Wave Race Blue Storm feels as good as Wave Race 64 does. It just feels super on point with its water physics. The game is super fun. It's got a great aesthetic, great just classy music. Overall, great game. That is definitely going to be at the end of this episode with the mini Game Trax thing. Wave Race 64 is a great game that is really worth checking out these days, I think. So we're down to the wire here. There are two more games here. First, I'm going to talk about Wipeout 64. So Wipeout 64 is another PS1 game that was ported over to the N64, kind of like Ridge Racer 64 and kind of like Micro Machines. But Wipeout was always looked at as a PlayStation franchise, and it still is. I mean, the new games are on PS4 and stuff like that. But Wipeout 64 is the only Wipeout game on a Nintendo console, as far as I'm aware. And it's pretty fun. I think Wipeout is fun, but also kind of hard and a little bit tough to get into. Even the new one on PS4 is kind of tough to get into. But Wipeout 64 is fun, and it feels really responsive, and the tracks and the graphics are really nice, for an N64 game, obviously. But it holds up pretty well, and I think it's the most playable Wipeout game out there. It's pretty accessible, even for someone like me who's not super into the franchise. So finally, last game I'm going to talk about is one of my favorites, F-Zero X. This is the second game in the F-Zero franchise, and there's not that many. There's only 3 console games and a couple of handheld games, but F-Zero X is a fantastic racing game. People like to compare Wipeout and Extreme G to F-Zero, and while they're similar in the sense where they're all futuristic racing games, F-Zero feels a lot different gameplay wise than the other futuristic kind of racing games. F-Zero feels a lot more precise in its controls. I feel like Wipeout kind of has this kind of like more floaty kind of thing, but F-Zero is very direct and to the point when it comes to how its ships feel. And there's another thing I like about F-Zero X is not necessarily the aesthetic, but the setting and the characters and the kind of the vibe that F-Zero has is a lot more kind of like comic booky, especially in F-Zero X. Like the title screen is like all the characters yelling, and like it says like vroom and stuff like that. I feel like F-Zero X did a really good job of selling its world. It's more than just some futuristic racing game. All the characters have their own profiles and their own stats, and I like playing as Bio Rex, who's just like a dinosaur who can drive this futuristic ship. And the music, I gotta mention music. The music for F-Zero X is awesome. A lot of it is like cool thrashy guitar stuff, and it's on the N64, so it's all fake instruments, so it in a way kind of sounds cooler because it's all like fake and chunky sounding. There's a song from this game that I love that's going to be included on the end of this episode as well. But yeah, F-Zero X is a great game, and one of my favorite racing games of all time, and obviously my favorite racing games on the N64. So yeah, that is a quick look at some great N64 racing games. I have more. I actually have some more right here that I am not going to include in this video. I'm going to save those for maybe a part 2 video. I know there's some games that I'm not mentioning, like Diddy Kong Racing and Star Wars Pod Racer and stuff like that. And believe me, I will get to them, but I didn't want to make this one too long. I wanted just to include some games and just kind of talk about some cool N64 racing games. So I think that about does it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. What are some N64 racing games that you really like that I didn't mention? And believe me, I'm gonna make a part 2 of this video at some point. So there are games that are good that I just didn't talk about. But what are some games that you like for N64 that are in the racing genre? Let me know in the comments down below. And what do you think about this format of video? Do you like kind of these more like topic-based discussions, talking about games and showing gameplay? Just let me know. I'm always open to talk about games and open to feedback and all that good stuff. So thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for a little mini Game Trax episode with some cool music here. And yeah, have a good day, have a good night, and happy gaming. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Game Talk. For the next 7 minutes, I'm going to play some music from some of the games I just featured. Sit back, relax, throw some headphones on, and enjoy.